What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, here to talk about patch 14.7. This is going to be a pretty fun patch. It is the patch that the Skarner rework is in. I'm excited about that. Let's talk about some stuff going on. Quick preamble. We have had fairly smaller patches recently. Some of that is the designers on live have had their time split. I know for me specifically, between half and a third of my time for the last month and a half to 2 months has been on Skarner, and so I haven't had time to do as much work on the live game. That said, I think the game's in a pretty good spot overall. There's, of course, still things we could do to improve the game. That will always be true, but some of that also is going to be taken up in future work where I have done some work on the live game that is not going to ship for several patches, that, we're intentionally holding it for a group of things, and so we'll see that come in over time. But yeah, this is acknowledging that we've had somewhat smaller patches recently, and this will keep happening in the very short term, and then we'll get slightly larger patches again in the near future. Of course, we're still committed to doing the seasonal model, and all the seasonal designers are still working on some really cool stuff, but in terms of the live side of things, we've been pretty obviously low velocity because of having low amounts of time recently. Either way, Skarner is coming out this patch. Skarner rework is ready to go. I've still spent a lot of time fixing out bugs. There's basically none left that I know of. There's going to be some occasionally weird stuff going on. I know there's a couple of things that I'm aware of some odd interactions you can kind of get into. They're going to be so rare that it's not worth trying to rebuild an entire ability for the chance it may be fixing how an ability works here in a couple of cases. But he's looking really functional, he's looking really fun, and that's really awesome. I think he is still primarily a Vanguard, though if you want to build fighter, go for it. But I believe Skarner should be first a tank with the ability to build attack damage. A decent analog here is Scion and Poppy, where they can build damage items, but they are very clearly tanks first. I think that is a pretty reasonable shape for the kit, and it's pretty easy to retune ratios as needed to make those things happen. I think the correct levers are there to make that tweak easy. I want to talk about his power level really quick. It's actually weird. I'm in the spot where I'm in charge of the live game's balance state and in charge of Skarner's specific state. So I guess I have myself to blame for a conflict of interest here. Regardless, the power level that we're expecting for Skarner is to launch at a 44 roughly % win rate day one. The expectation that gameplay analysis has given me is that he'll have roughly a 10% win rate gain across I forget what our mark is here, but essentially we put him at top half of champions in terms of mastery depth required. So Skarner, despite having a fairly simple kit on paper, and the tooltips are easy to read and they're not essays, and I think these are all really positive things, there is enough specific to Skarner skills in terms of how you play the champion. The way that Shaco and Singed are unique and don't play like other champions here. Skarner has enough of that going on that we think he's going to be in the top half of hard to play champs in League. That said, I don't think he's going to be near Cassante or Azir or Rexi, who are all top 5, but still on the top half here. So we'll see if that ends up actually being true, but that is the expectation that we have here. And so there is a decent chance, and this is based on how quick he is to learn, right? If it turns out that people who are playing Skarner are really about it and keep playing Skarner and express a lot of mastery very quickly, we'll see the win rate climb faster than a champion who's played broadly, but people only play him 2 or 3 times, and that makes it most of the play rate, right? So that's gonna change things pretty rapidly here. Regardless, the strong side expectation is that we may have to nerf him by the end of the first patch, that we may deliver a Skarner by 14.8. But again, the expectation is that if we hit our power goals, that he should be around 44% on day 0, and maybe not have to nerf him by the end. We are willing to do a Friday evening or Monday morning micro patch if he is gaining win rate faster than we think, or he starts higher than we think. But ultimately, I think he's pretty clearly, or I think we expect him to be on the strong side, and that as players gain mastery, we will have to nerf him, as opposed to he's on the weak side, players are bad at him, and then he'll also need buffs. That is where we're at right now. I've, for a long time, even before I was a designer, held that I thought Riot should release champs knowing that players are going to be bad at him day one, or any champ going to be bad at them day one, and then it's okay to expect to nerf the champion for 2 patches as players gain mastery. I'm now in a position to enforce that, and that is what I believe is true. That we should tune a champion, acknowledging that players have no mastery in the champion yet, and then tune them down as players get better. So that's what we're doing here with Skarner. We expect to have to nerf him at some point. I hope that is not a day 2 micro patch. I hope he's not that overtuned. That is not the goal to make him that overtuned. If he is, we will nerf him right away. But it's to the point where it's like, yeah, if we have to nerf him in 0.8, and it's like, yeah, he's kind of getting there. That would be the hope. Okay, let's talk about what's going on in the patch itself. Up first, one of the first things we did was I don't want to call it an overhaul, but we've clearly done a lot to nerf support recently. And this is one where we're taking a pretty strong stance here. I mean, we as a team are deciding this together, right? I, as the design lead, am the sort of strongest voice here and saying we should really do this. And then in many of these cases, people are like, yep, this makes sense, we should do it. Let me give some context on role changes across time. So I want to give a special shout out to the jungle update that Phlox did for season 2023. So this would have come out about, 16 months ago, right? This is pre-season 2023, so November of 2022 or October of 2022. So jungle had for a very long time been the least played role in the game across most MMR brackets. It varies by server, of course. I think Korea specifically has really, really few junglers and a lot of AD carry players, and then that's different in NA and EU as the 2 of the other big servers that have good players in it. China is its own thing. There's absolutely no support players in China. It's a really, really unpopular role in China. Anyway, talking about jungle though, jungle has been an unpopular role and very overpowered. And the update that Phlox did for season 2023 was made jungle a lot more popular. It did make it more powerful, right? They're just getting a bunch more free power, but pets were a really smart idea. The evolving smite was a really good idea. Just a lot of really good stuff was done there to make jungle more fun. It made jungle more overpowered. And a thing that we did in the end of last year was do a big set of sweeping jungle nerfs. Because jungle was OP, and of course it was taking away agency and fun from everyone else in the game. The problem is if you nerf jungle enough, you get into a state where you go back to having a bunch of autofill junglers, and then you still lose to the better jungler because your autofill jungler is not going to be as good as the Graves main. Even if the role is less powerful, getting autofill just means you lose anyway. And I'm the one who ended up developing those changes and shipping them. I knew it would make jungle weaker. I knew it would make jungle a bit less fun to play because you would have less individual agency over the game. And, though we reverted a large number of changes pretty quickly, at the end of the day, jungle is back to being relatively unpopular, and I wish we did less. So anyway, that happened. Those are learnings, and we're like, okay, cool. Hey, having an autofill jungler kind of sucks. Maybe we should have left it OP. Anyway, going into this season, we made a bunch of changes to support items that are honestly pretty similar to the jungle stuff, right? Where instead of making the choice at level 1, you all buy the same item. We had targets for when your item would combine. We hit those targets. The pacing of gold income and the sightstone coming online were all accurate, so good on the designers there who all tune the systems. And so instead the supports got, cool, unique item outputs, right? You have Bloodsong and Zazax and Dreammaker, which is honestly, I'll say, way more fun than just ooh, I got 30 ability power and 40 health. Shard of True Eyes, these are better items, right? This is a better design system. Shout out the designers, right? Really good stuff here, right? This made, unfortunately, very, very little impact in the popularity of playing support. Despite all the systems work and the systems being better and the role being, I think, more fun, I'm having a good time playing support this season, we did not get really a meaningful uptick in support pick rates. And so it's kind of thing where in the jungle case, I think we should have been willing to eat the role as OP if it meant you weren't losing to getting autofilled junglers. In the case of support, we made support OP and we didn't actually get a meaningful increase in support pick rate, especially in the servers that had really, really no support players and they were constant autofills. Because some of the survey data we got, especially in low support popularity servers, was I don't want to play support because it feels like I can't carry. And this is why actually some of the changes that I had personally shipped for support across like last year was often giving supports better AP ratios. That if for whatever reason your Nami got the double kill, or your Sona took down the turret, or she got the shutdown on the 6-0 Rengar jungle, that she could use the gold to, you know, decent gains here. Like, yeah, it's probably still better on Aphelios, it's better on Zeri, it's better on Jinx, but like, hey, it's not, oh, we're screwed, the shutdown went to Taric, nothing can happen now. And now, to be clear, we haven't done any scaling updates to Taric in a long time. But I think directionally saying that if the support gets a shutdown, they can use it, I think is a good thing. That said, I think we could have and should have done a much better job of saying, when you get the gold, when you get these items, what outputs are you getting? And so a thing I want to say on that line is I think we should take a really, really close look and a pretty hard stance on, if I'm snowballing as a support, if I am getting gold as a support, if I'm getting active effects as a support, exactly how are my outputs growing? The difficult thing is if we scale defense too hard, you can get to a point where teams feel invulnerable. So I think we can go too far. But right now, what it feels like is mostly when supports gain gold, they just gain damage. And I think that's not great. And I think we can do a fair bit of work to unwind some level of the amount of damage scaling on support champions. Because the nice thing is, unlike, let's say, a top lane tank like Maokai or Sion or you know, tank Poppy, tank Udi, or whatever, say what you want about like their overall gameplay patterns, like these are champions who have to kill minions and be able to threaten turrets and fight back a Renekton in order to succeed at League of Legends. Support Nautilus, support Rel, support Leona do not need to do that. They should have enough damage in lane such that 2v2s can end in kills, but at level 15, they don't need to fight a Renekton, they just need to stun somebody. And so I think, you know, taking a stab at like, no, here are the support tanks. We stop giving you damage at a certain point. It's something we could probably do and move in that direction. And we can look at enchanters do the same kind of stuff here. So there's a couple things going on here with all that preamble out of the way, which is what are the goals for supports right now? So number one, and this is emblematic of Zazak's Bloodsong and Bandit getting changes. If the primary output you have as a support is just damage, not utility, not lockdown, right? This is contrasting Zyra and Brand and even Lux and Vel'Koz with like a Blitzcrank or a Leona or a Thresh, where certainly their utility is almost all offense, right? Nautilus has very little defensive utility. I guess he can shield himself and can run Aftershock, but like he's stunning you and damaging you. Thresh has the lantern, but otherwise he's stunning you and damaging you. Leona, she can be tanky, but she's stunning you and damaging you. That to me is different than Zyra, even though like technically Zyra roots you and knocks you up with the ulti, but I think we can all understand that the outputs of Zyra are not the same as the outputs of Leona. Anyway, the point is, with that delineation in mind, I've talked before about champions having sort of intentionally elevated and deflated win rates because some like win rate has to be 0-sum at the end of the day, and some champs are naturally going to be above 50 and below 50 as balanced and fair feeling as and against champions. This is taking a stab at saying, hey, if you're playing a damage primary champion, Brand, Lux, Xerath, whatever, in support, you have no reason to be win rate inflated. I don't think any of these champions like deserve to be above 50. They will feel high agency at 49 to 50. They will feel plenty powerful to play against at 49 to 50. And contrasting Xerath support to Xerath mid feels very low agency. Xerath mid can't force you to die. Xerath mid has really horrible matchups against champions like Zed. And there's just plenty of like really, really good, you know, assassins who can do well into Xerath, and Xerath mid can feel weak even if he's winning more than half his games. I don't think Xerath support ever feels weak at 50. Nor does Lux support. Lux support is a 50% win rate support, and she's most played support in the game, right? And having a Zyra and a Brand at like 52.5, 53 is like, well, you're not necessarily overpowered in that you're not really causing huge problems because you go into higher MRs and these champions aren't actually very good. But it's like, no, we're going to Lux curve you. You're going to be 50% win rate in lower MMRs, and you'll just be kind of bad in coordinated play. And saying that we know that there are Zyra support mains out there. We know there are Brand support mains out there. We know there are Xerath support mains out there. Your champions do not get to have elevated win rates. Those win rates are preserved for enchanters and tanks, and you can sit at 50 in most skill brackets. That's fine, but or we're not interested in having 51% win rate mages when that can be 51% win rate enchanter instead. We know that win rate impacts pick rate. We know that when Zyra's win rate goes up, she gets played more. When Brand's win rate goes up, he gets played more. When Sona's win rate goes up, she gets played more. And we're saying, cool, we want to use that budget to go have people play Nami and Lulu and Sona, as well as Nautilus and Leona and Thresh, and not go play Zyra and Brand. And we think that though we will now have fewer support mains, because there will invariably be someone who be like, well, I don't want to play a champ who can't 1v9 carry and deal all the damage to support. It's like, okay, you can play another role, or you can play a balanced Brand if you're below Emerald, and he's going to be weak if you're above, and that just is what it is. And just being like, this is what we want for the game, that there will be more autofield supports, and you won't be coaxed into playing a damage support, you'll be coaxed into playing an actual support with supportive aspects. And so we will lose some support players. That will happen, and it's making the call that this is correct for the game. So that is a pretty long preamble on the updated balance strategy on where we want supports to sit. Again, this is not Zyra should be non-viable everywhere. This is not Brand should be non-viable everywhere. This is not Morgana should be non-viable everywhere. This is, let's acknowledge that these champions can be fine instead of good, and the goal here is to put primary damage champions in the fine camp. They are fine. They are playable champions. If you want to play them, you can be successful if you know the champion well. But none of these champions, I think, should have elevated win rates that grant them high pick rates. I think the game is worse for it, and so we're making that call here. This might change if we get in a world where there's not enough damage in the game, and we actually need to coax people into playing mages a little bit more often in support role. That might change if the landscape of League of Legends changes severely at some point in time. We're not anywhere close to that, but that's kind of the space here. So what this means is, and the other thing here, I guess we'll just say, hey, so we're nerfing Zazak straight up, we're nerfing Bloodsong straight up, and we're nerfing Imperial Mandate straight up. And this is entirely because we want the outputs here more than we want player choice. So Karma right now has a pretty compelling choice between going Zazax and going Dreammaker. The power level between those two is actually pretty close. After nerfing Zazax this patch, it will not be close. Dreammaker will clearly be the best. But the thing is, Dreammaker's output is still damage plus durability, which means even if she does automatically go Dreammaker every game, she's still not only doing defensive outputs with a support item. And the same is true for Sona. Sona currently has the option of going Bloodsong sometimes. She has the option of going Zazax sometimes. She mostly goes Dreammaker, but the other two options are available to her and are not terrible ideas. That will probably stop being a viable option for her. And so she will be bound to going Celestial Opposition or Dreammaker just every game. Nami's in this boat where Nami has a really good reason to go for Dreammaker or for Zazax, and she will no longer have the choice to go Zazax. It'll be bad. And it's like, yes, we are valuing the player choice of support upgrades below we want support's damage output to be lower. And there's no obvious slam dunk where everyone wins everywhere, right? If Zazax was just OP and it was crushing the support choice structure, then it's a free nerf. But it's not. This is going to get rid of some choice and support. Imperial Mandate has two users. It's like Janna and Zillion, and then there's like, or it's like Janna and then like a quarter of Karma support games and like a quarter of Zillion support games. There's like one other support. I think like Nami buys it in like more than half. And that's it. This item has like 2.5 users. Normally, this would not be a reason to nerf this item. Imperial Mandate has 2 users. Okay. It's pretty niche. In fact, maybe we should buff Imperial Mandate. But the fact of the matter is, Imperial Mandate's primary output is just deal damage out of the support role, which we don't want to support. And so Imperial Mandate will still have Janna as a core user. Zillion might start skipping. Nami might start skipping. Karma might start skipping. And, okay, a primary damage item is now less common in support. Good, is the end result here. Again, this hurts choice. This absolutely hurts, choice, and the payoffs we think are worth it. And so this will be a niche item until we can redesign it to have its output not be primarily about damage. That will take time. That is design resources that we haven't had because we're working on things that are very big and take a lot of time and effort to handle. But this is how stuff works, right? There are priorities. There is a limited amount of time in the day. And though I would like to redesign Imperial Mandate and I would like to redesign Echoes of Helia to be more defensive and actually have a user base, I would love to do those things. That requires time that I don't have right now, and that we don't have as a pod right now, but would be useful, right? Be down to have these items be good and whatnot. So systemically, those are what's happening to support items. We are nerfing Zealous, we're nerfing Bloodsuck, nerfing Imperial Mandate, and we're not giving them any compensation. We are also taking a stab at 3 different supports who are affected in this system. These are specifically champions who are high damage for their subclass champions. So what's cool is we have really, really good data reports around damage per minute. So I know, like, in minute 2 of League of Legends, how much, or for these 60 seconds, how much damage is Karma doing? And for the next 60 seconds, and the next 60, and the next 60, and the next 60. And it's fun because I can, like, put all the supports on a graph together and see who moves up, who falls off. Almost every enchanter has the exact same, like, 1 through 5 curve. They're almost indistinguishable. They all have a pretty similar amount of early game lane phase damage, which is fine because we generally want there to be lethality in early laning phase. The 1 through 6 should be fairly volatile. It should matter. It should not just be heal bot versus heal bot. There should be a meaningful amount of damage output. And what's interesting is if you look at, so Karma's an example where Karma's damage goes like this, and then it goes down here, and then it flattens out. Her damage per minute goes back down to the bottom. Because in lane, she's landing Q, landing E, and then she goes into team fights and goes, I'm going to W people, and I'm going to stop dealing damage. By comparison, Morgana goes and then goes and then goes because she maxes W second in support, and she just flies off into the ether, and she, like, nearly ties champs like Zyra and Brand. Like, her damage curve looks like Zyra and Brand's damage curve. And you have champions like Nami and Sona, and they follow the Morgana curve, and then Morgana goes up here, and then these guys go, and they're still above Soraka, who's down here, but they're well below Morgana, who's up here. But it's like, I think there's a lot of room where they can get closer to Soraka, right? They can maybe plateau a little bit lower, or they can dip down a little bit as combat gets less frequent. But regardless, it's like, actually, I don't want to see the damage per minute keep going up on enchanters, unless there's a really obvious reason why they should. Morgana right now, her kit is shaped to be very clearly magey. That's going to go down with Zazax changes, but she's still building Leandri Zonias every game, and those items have a lot of ability power on them. And she's building Zazax every game. That item has a lot of damage on it, and she maxes Q and then W, which has a lot of damage on it. And if we're willing to support Morgana mid and jungle as viable champions, W's rank up has to be good enough to make those champions, like, viable in that role, right? And we could say, screw it, we're going to sacrifice Morgana jungle, we're going to sacrifice Morgana mid, we're going to crush W, and we're just going to, like, make you max shield second, and you're not going to be a mage. We could make that choice. That's a lot of scope. That's a lot of discussions. That's an entire sort of kit reshape that we have to, like, spend time on. But that is a totally reasonable thing that we could choose to do for Morgana. Anyway, we settled on these 3 champions because for every mage support, they're just losing damage off of Zazax, if you're playing an AD champ, like you're playing Pyke or Pantheon or Camille or Senna, you're getting a Bloodsong nerf here. If you're playing Ashe, one of these 2 is hitting you. Imperial Mandate is going to hit a lot of these champions like Janet as well. So Janet, for example, right, Imperial Mandate and Zazax are both getting nerfed directly. I'm pretty sure Emax Janet is weak right now and could deserve to be, like, straight buffed. But the optics of we're buffing Janet when she's the strongest support in the game right now, we'll wait for these nerfs. We'll see what the impact actually is. We expect this to be about 1.5% win rate off of Zazax and about 0.5% win rate off Mandate, which means Janet goes from, like, 53-3 to 51-3, which... that's a pretty fair Janet win rate as far as I'm concerned. And if you want to buff Emax to, like, make that build viable, and she goes to, like, 51-8 as W max, that's fine, right? And then she'll also be, like, 51-5 as shield max, and it's like, that's a balanced champion, right? For her output. So regardless, again, there's a lot of champions we're skipping because we are doing these item updates. So anyway, Karma, every single one of her basic abilities has been rescripted. Yeah, the story here is this rework was made a long time ago, and the way that she works right now today is every quarter second she does the math on every single ability and then feeds it to a tooltip variable that she doesn't read in her tooltips. But also, those variables were occasionally used in her actual spell calculations because they didn't actually do the calculation themselves in the flow of the ability. That's not great. That could mean, by the way, in between the quarter second of the calculation running and something happening, like, you can get in a spot where you shield somebody and get Staff of Flowing Water to trigger and then shoot your Q missile, but because the quarter second loop hasn't run, you don't get the AP in actual functional practice for your Q missile. So the logic has been changed so that, like, when you actually land the Q missile, do all the math, do all the things, let's go. Or at least when you fire it. I forget which one I put it in, but, like, basically, like, when you do something intentional with Q, it grabs all your data and then says go. And I think it's on missile launch, but I could be wrong. I forget where I put the events, but regardless, ended up having to rebuild all of the lookup logic on Q, W, and E to make these things work appropriately. because I just wanted a cleaner code base, and now it's much easier to update her in the future if we want to do like specific balance on Arena or ARAM. Everything's all in the right place where it's now trivial for designer to do this going forward. Regardless, Karma was a Zazax Mandate user. She built Malignance much more than Mandate, but Mandate was still in like a third of her games in support. And so if she's losing 1.5% in Zazax, of course she can still fall back on Dreammaker, and it's fine. But she's going to lose a ton of win rate from that, of course, and so want to give her some buffs. Karma mid and Karma top are around 49% win rate. That's a totally fine win rate for solo lane Karma. That is much, much higher. Even if you control for only Malignance Cosmic Drive builds compared to 14.1, she is still much better in solo lanes than she was back then. So I know people love their hyperbole of, I guess, Karma's not allowed to be good anymore, but she's still massively better than she was. She went from being a troll pick to being like, I guess, slightly on the weak side of balanced in solo lanes, which is totally fine. She's building AP, she's building haste, she's building the things that we expect her to build. In support, she's also currently much, much, much better than she was in 14.1. Around 1.52% win rate higher than she was back then, even if you're comparing like for like builds. She wasn't doing any Malignance builds back in 14.1, and now people have realized that it's good, but even then, you know, you compare it to Mandate or you compare to Shirelia's first or whatever, and it's like she's still much better. Regardless, because we're nerfing 2 core items of hers, we're going to deliver some straight buffs. So first is rescripting and rebuilding the R plus E shield to, for the AoE shield part, only care about R ranks. It still just gives her the, you know, R shield on top of her main target, but rebuilding it such that it no longer cares what your E rank is when shielding her allies. This ends up mathematically being about a 20% shielding buff. We intentionally kept the move speed the same for the secondary targets, but we can easily individually tune that whenever we want. But basically just picked new math, picked new numbers, and said, here's what this ability is going to do. We want to give you some win rate. We want to give her 1% win rate, and we're nerfing 2 of her items, and so we want to give her more than 1% win rate. And so there is a lot of power in the R plus E buff. Again, the AoE shield is about 20 to 25% stronger, and then we're buffing the root duration on W by 0.2 seconds. Functionally, for Karma support, it's a 0.2 second duration buff. It's technically 0.2 to 0 based on rank, but she doesn't max W first or second. She still won't. But it means that her ability to be a crowd controller, to play in short range, to want to be a little bit more durable are going up. Her ability to make her team more durable is going up. We are specifically not giving Karma more damage. In fact, Karma will deal less damage next patch, but she's going to provide more durability, more crowd control, and actually then have the incentive for herself to be more durable as well, because she wants to hold the W tether a little bit more. So some changes there to our girl Karma. We are directly just nerfing the rank up on Nami E from 20 to 80 per hit to 20 to 60 per hit. This is largely to go after mid-game support damage. I think their first max is fairly relevant in terms of making sure the lane can be fairly lethal. That definitely matters. But the second max comes in late enough that you're not really doing the laning phase anymore, right? This is level 8 plus, up to 13. And so this is a place where damage can go down, and it's just a pretty free way to take out damage that is not going to be very heavily felt by support champions on average here. So this is, of course, a direct nerf. Nami does not need direct nerfs, and she is a Zazax Mandate user, so she does need buffs. There are a bunch of tweaks to W. So technically, there's one more nerf, which is a very small 0 to 20 and 5% AP ratio damage nerf on W. However, there are really, really substantial buffs to the healing and the other aspect of W. So the healing is going up by 0 to 20 plus 15% AP, so more than making up for the AP ratio change. And the bounce fall off is getting buffed from minus 15% per hit with a... Every 100 AP is 7.5% earned back, so 200 AP puts you at your bounces no longer fall off, which is 3 items, which is no support reaches 3 items, to minus 10%, and the 100 AP gives you 10% back. So at 100 AP, which is like, you know, Malignance plus runes, basically, puts you at no fall off on your bounces. So though the initial hit of damage will be lower, the initial hit of healing will be higher, but you do the math pretty much any generic way after you have components, and every bounce heal and every bounce damage will be better. So her mid to late game will be much better, especially in forms of healing. In terms of actual damage, the bounce kind of makes up for the W damage nerf. The E nerf is never made up for her, but she's getting way, way more healing, way more team fight impact. And if we have to give Nami like a little bit more juice, levels 1 through 5, we can bump something by 3 AD or 5 base value somewhere to make her like a slightly better lane if we need that. That's fine. But the goal here is Nami power positive, while still taking away some sort of mid-game damage off the champion, because again, shape-wise, what we want for some supports. Similar story here for Sona. She's mostly a Dreammaker user. She's rarely an Imperial Mandate user, so she's not really getting any systemic nerfs here. We are very lightly buffing her passive. The Q power core just kind of sucks. The damage amp is going from 40% to 50%. It's still worse than the W and E amps, but it's a place that it's just like more appreciable. It's where the big number is, so it's a free place to give a buff that's not that much power. Yes, it's Sona getting some damage, but like whatever. The real nerf is in the Q damage aura. This is something that is pretty invisible to Sona players on average, and so this is just a free place to take power away. AP ratio is getting halved on the Q aura. Again, it's really hard to appreciate. Like, you're still going to try to walk into range and give people the aura, the buff, because it's correct to do so. But it is a lot of damage that Sona was providing that we can kind of take away kind of for free without really like nerfing satisfaction to the champion, especially because we're going to bring this back. Even though it's going to be less power than the Q nerf, it's more appreciable than the Q change. The final thing, though, is a very large 15% AP ratio, which doubles the AP ratio on her W heal. Keep in mind the heal always hits her and then the lowest health ally in range. That range is actually quite large. So it is a very large throughput to her late game healing output. Sona's late game is already very good. Sona already builds a bunch of ability power. Her most common first item is by far Seraph's Embrace. And so she's still going to build a lot of AP, and that's good. Like, Sona being a unique enchanter that really, really wants to build the ability power items is cool. I think that is cool that she has a somewhat different enchanter build path than other enchanters, but we're saying, okay, Sona, you're snowballing, you have a Magi's, you're doing really well here. Okay, what are you getting out of that? What you are getting out of that is supportive aspects. You're getting, you know, not a bunch of AoE damage. You're going to get some extra healing. We're gonna make sure your shield, you know, AP ratio is good and whatnot. And so saying, yes, you can go build AP Sona, that's fine, go for it. We're happy to have you do this, but we want to make sure that your outputs are the outputs that we want for you as Sona. And so it's a lot for these sort of 3 lines, but I think these are all really good lines for her. We have some other like small changes here. We are doing a nerf to Static Shiv. This item, yeah, is overpowered. So we buffed Infinity Edge and Quick Blades. It roughly doubled Jinx's pick rate. It roughly doubled Zeri's pick rate. Obviously, some of that as well is Smolder was the most picked AD carry in the game and lost 4% win rate. So that pick rate has to go somewhere, and so it went to the Crit Marksman, unsurprisingly. But also those champions gain a bunch of win rate because Smolder is still like top 10 most played bot laners and is like a 46% win rate champion. And when you have that high of a pick rate and that low of a win rate, you will directly inflate other champions' win rates by about, I did the math a while ago, it's around like 0.3%. So every AD carry in the game is about 0.3% win rate inflated because of Smolder. So when you're like, wow, Jinx is like 52.5, it's like, well, she's actually 52.2. That's still probably too good, but like, hey, by the way, sometimes those numbers matter. And, you know, this gets walked back a little bit. Anyway, the strongest core trend here for what is OP is Static Shiv. Static Shiv as the nerf is compelling for a couple of reasons. So one, again, I will say that this does technically hurt choice structure a little bit. Shiv being default optimal on Jinx, Zeri, and Sivir makes sense. These champs already have some AoE, and turns out they just want to augment their AoE, make it feel better. Hurricane doesn't have good Kraken Slayer synergy, nor does it really have Rocket synergy at all, because a lot of what Jinx wants to do is do Rocket Splash, not single target DPS focus. And so having a cheaper item that lets her finish IE sooner is the better item for her. Zeri just wants to do a bunch of AoE. She moves really quickly, which makes her good with Energize. Her attack speed is hard capped, which makes her bad with on-hit items like Kraken Slayer. Sivir just like is AoE queen and just wants to AoE everybody, and also again has pretty bad sustained damage access. She's basically hitting when her W is up and just wants to get onto the multiplicative power spikes. Like on-hit damage just truly does not scale her Q or her W, and that's where all of her damage is. So it is not surprising these champions don't want to go Kraken Slayer or even Stormrazor and just want to go Static Shiv. That makes sense. Technically, no choice structures being broken down here. However, I think though we're nerfing Shiv will probably still be optimal on these champions. But at the end of the day, what's happening is now that top-end AD carry builds are so much better because of the strict buffs to the Last Whisper upgrades and the strict buffs to Infinity Edge and Quick Blades, that getting to those spikes sooner is a little bit too much power for the ones who can use Shiv well, because Shiv is so much cheaper than Kraken and Stormrazor. And so we are returning some of the Shiv price that we took away back in, I don't know, 13.3 or whatever, 14.3, and putting it back to 2,900 from 2,700, so that these champions who scale incredibly well with gold have to actually earn enough gold to get there instead of getting to shortcut the spike a little bit by buying cheap items with really good stats on them because all they want are the stats. One other thing I wanted to talk about is a sort of line here on, I think the actual I think the single biggest tension, actually, second biggest tension in League of Legends, tension one is junglers and the rest of their team. That is incredibly hard to solve. I don't have an answer for you. The second biggest tension, though, is I think actually top lane fighters and AD carries. These are the two most isolated carry roles. Mid laners can go anywhere. I have, other than mages saying that, mage players saying that mages are bad, even though it's not true, mid laners can go anywhere and do anything, and they get to 1v1, they get to be part of team fights, they're just really central to the map, and I just, mid lane is like always a very popular role, and there's always stuff to do. Jungler, again, I mentioned the strife between junglers and their team because laners have no appreciation for what jungling actually takes. But regardless, jungling gets to have a lot of individual agency, but the crappy thing is their teammates yell at them erroneously, and that really sucks. But junglers as an actual, suite of powerful champions, very powerful. Supports, you're playing support, you don't expect to be 1v9ing, and there's only so many players who are willing to play that kind of play style, but it is what it is. Supports aren't going to 1v9. So that leaves the last two roles, which is top laners who aren't playing tanks. Because if you're playing a tank, obviously you're going to go team fight. You're not expecting a 1v9 when you're playing Malphite. But if you're playing Riven, you're isolated, right? You don't have a lot of say over how the map goes, right? For the first 12 minutes of the game, you're in your own island up there in top lane, chilling, playing top lane. And if you're playing Jinx or Zeri or whatever in bot lane, you're in your own island bot lane. And if your supports go run away to go gank mid, you're going to 1v1 the Ezreal for 15 minutes until it's time to fight over the third dragon. That's just how bot lane works. And so both these roles have very similar sort of structures in that they're just kind of on their islands. People come and interact with them or leave and interact with other places. And then eventually team fights happen, and it's who's the bigger carry? Is Riven or Renekton or Rumble the bigger carry, or is Jinx or Zeri or Phelios the bigger carry? And I think that ultimately this puts these two roles in really, really aggressive tension with one another, because if fighters are too good, they kill everyone before the AD carry can ramp up. The game ends because 2 Renekton ends the game. Not to say that the other champions aren't doing stuff, of course. And then also, Wukong top lane specifically goes and tries to kill Jinx, because that's how a lot of the class of these champions work, right? And meanwhile, if the AD carry is too good, fighters truly cannot team fight because they are not tanky enough to withstand 3-item Jinx. Or in some cases, if the gold is inflated enough or the items are good enough, 2-item Jinx. And so it's okay, that's always going to be an extreme tension. And as soon as fighters egregiously fail the fighter versus AD carry test, good teams only play tanks. And we've had that before, right? We've had the tank only metagame because it wasn't worth playing fighters. If AD carries are too good and fighters can't step up to them by the time team fights happen, your class doesn't exist. Obviously in solo queue, you can just win lane, win game, and that does happen. But you'll see pro play very quickly be oh, it takes every game. Why would I bother? I'll just play for Jinx. And that was with Lucian banned the MSI meta last year, for example, right? And then you look at, Worlds the last couple of years, and top laners were more important. I think, top laners were pretty much the defining role in both World Finals, but I also felt like AD carries were clearly relevant in those games. The top laners did a little bit more to carry, but that relative balance felt fine overall, I would say. So it's but that's a very, very delicate tension. And it's tough because these champions don't interact directly at all, except for Vayne and Tristana. Usually not Tristana in top lane, but Vayne and a couple other champions being in both roles once in a while. But that's the tough thing here, right? And so we're at a state here where it's actually, Sundered Sky and Eclipse are probably OP. But if we only nerf Shiv this little bit, we leave IE where it is, we leave LDR where it is, and we nerf Sundered Sky and Eclipse, which they probably deserve, we really, really risk table flipping and fighters being felt as unviable and AD carries being the only side lane role that matters. I actually think we're really close to these roles actually being appropriately balanced. That's my belief. Maybe I am wrong, but we'll see how the MSI metagame shapes up. We'll see how players overall feel. But the fact that we saw Crit Marksman gain 1.5% win rate and that Jinx is now the most played AD carry in the game means I don't think Crit Marksman feel bad. We're probably fine here now. So I don't think we have to go any harder on making AD carries feel better in the short term. There are still some longer term things we can do. But anyway, all to say that it is a fairly small nerf to Static Shiv as a way to bring down the top end of AD carries who are performing the best to make their power curves take 30 seconds to a minute longer to access. The really big power spikes, and those are all going to be really positive things here overall. Okay, we are returning Jungle Olaf to the game. There are several lines here. But returning Jungle Olaf He has historically been able to hold a play rate before, and so we are going through the backlog of champs who used to get played in alt roles, had a normal win rate, had a respectable play rate, and trying to return them because they had an audience. This was a tried and true set of champs who had an audience. Part of this here of returning old junglers is not to get more jungle mains, though it will have some impact, is to say you got autofilled, you've got a champ that you can play. This I think is valuable. This is useful. I played some solo queue recently where I think we had 3 support mains on my team, and I swapped my mid laner and I played Tristana mid because I can play AD carries pretty well, and I was the only player on my team who did well, and we still lost, and it was too bad. But that just, you can get in those states where it's like, cool, yeah, I have to play mid lane because I'm going to role swap my teammate here, and I've got a champ that I know how to play. That's useful. Having this for top laners who get pushed in the jungle, here's some top laners you know how to play. Great. I think that is worth having, a decent number of champions in each role that you can play. Okay, anyway, let's talk about the changes themselves. W duration is going up from 4 seconds to 5. This means that it is a pretty free jungle clear lever, because the more attacks you get, the better your jungle clear is. This is being paired with a mana cost increase, which will slightly clamp down on the amount of top lane power, since top lane Olaf is already on the strong side. We are adding jungle monster mods to the Q and the E. Q is getting a flat damage increase on jungle monsters. E is getting going to reset 2 seconds per auto instead of 1 sec per auto when hitting monsters, so you can spam E in your jungle clear. And that will allow you to get lower health and thus get more attack speed, and thus turbocharge your clear itself, which should be pretty cool. And then, because we actually think that these changes are going to end up being win rate positive on top lane, we are pairing a nerf that will affect laners because they can actually run out of mana, and putting a mana cost on R. It was free, it's now 100 mana, normal ultimate. We'll keep track. If top lane Olaf lost a ton of power and is trash because he has no mana pool, we can retune things as needed and move things around as he is required. But we are expecting this to be neutral to maybe negative on top lane Olaf, and we expect to gain some power on jungle Olaf. We are also returning jungle Silus. Now, we don't know if it's going to be enough power. We're happy to keep revisiting this if he needs more, or give him less if he needs less. But ultimately, this is returning jungle Silus to the game. So I have been outspoken before, maybe not externally, but at Riot, that I was really, really, really not a fan of last year's jungle Silus. This champ could basically not clear the jungle, and so all he would do is get level 3 and then perma gank with Dark Harvest and a Night Harvester, and just like E forward WQ was enough of a gank that it would probably kill you, and then you try to walk back to the tower, and now you're open to E2. And if you don't walk back to the tower, the Nautilus hooks you because you're standing still. And so I felt that the gameplay of jungle Silus made the game way worse, because he is just a kill champion ganker with very little gameplay, because he has functionally 2 free target dashes of E1 forward and a W click on you. So you couldn't outplay the gank. There's nothing to dodge. E1 WQ was a guaranteed combo, and with Harvester and Dark Harvest, it was all the damage needed to just kill you. And this champ would snowball, and I thought the game was miserable for laners when this happened. Thankfully, the change here is jungle is allowed to clear his, Silus is allowed to clear his jungle. Also, Night Harvester is gone, which makes the gameplay pattern way less toxic, in my opinion. So I think these are very, the ecosystem has changed very meaningfully so. And so I'm happy to see what this looks like with a jungle Silus who can actually clear the jungle and play a bit more as a normal champion. I do think there is room to do some kit reshapes to Silus, make him less bursty, less of an assassin, more of a sustained damage dealer, have him care more about durability outputs or something. I don't know what that would be exactly, but I think there's room to make Silus more frontliner and less assassin. That is not happening here, but regardless, again, trying to return Silus jungle because he was popular before, but trying to make him not just the spam ganker. Otherwise, we're going into mostly low scope champ changes. This is basically just really quick and easy stuff that usually takes very little development time, but it's letting the last patch data come in and saying, now that we know what's happening from the last patch, what do we want to do? Static Shift was an example of this, right? Where it's like, what did it mean for AD carries overall? Okay, we're only going to do this change. So Galio landed weaker than we thought. If you, generally speaking, if you dig in and you say, oh, well, if you buy his 3rd most common starting item, his win rate's actually 2% higher, that is almost always fake data. Any item that is not his most built item has a default inflated win rate, because only players who are smart enough to identify this item as good are the ones who are buying it, which means they are already inflating the win rate by being good at the champion. So the fact that Galio has a 51% win rate right away his first item is fake data. Galio is actually pretty bad. So we are basically reverting a bunch of preemptive nerfs that he didn't actually need, with the goal of 1.5% win rate. It is some of the AP ratio on the passive, it is the flat DR on W, and it is the flat base damage on the E. This is a mix of changes that will buff mid as well as support, because both of those roles right now are around, I think, 48.5% win rate, somewhere around there. And I think, of course, there is room for further optimization. So putting him at 50 and then letting players get better at him is fine. I don't think we're in a world where Galio is a supreme pro flex pick. It is in the back of our minds if we need to kill Galio support because it's the best way to not pro jail him. And the alternative is, right, kill Galio support or 48% Galio mid. We choose kill Galio support. His primary play race is mid, right? But we're not there yet. We are willing to see if pros care or not. And if they do, even then it's going to like eat some Nautilus pick rate, and then we get some more like champion variants. That's kind of a cool thing, right? So for now, we're willing to support both roles unless something breaks, and we'll identify if that happens. But regardless, right, here's base value, and then here's AP ratio, which we think is going to relatively well split the balance across both roles. Kane got over nerf last patch. He lost a ton of win rate from Profane Hydra locking out. I am adamant this is the right choice. Tiamat asks you to cast a spell. By casting it, unless it's Stride Breaker, you are not moving. By casting it, you are not attacking. By casting it, you're not using another spell. This item has as much damage as it does because it asks you to actually cast it. Kane Q does not have that same price because he can't move, attack, or cast other spells during Q except for items. And so Profane Hydra shortcuts the entire conceit of what this item is meant to actually cost you. And so the alternative is we can brick the hell out of Profane Hydra and it can be only good on Kane, or Kane can work like a normal champion and have to care about the cast time on spells. Kane should care about the normal cast times on spells. Players can learn the muscle memory. It's only been in the game for 2.5 months. Truly, y'all can deal with this. This is the right thing for the game, and I very strongly believe this. And so either players can get better at using actives, or they can switch builds, and that's fine. Anyway, all this to say that he's got alt builds with Eclipse and Sundred Sky. If you're playing fighter, he's got alt builds with Yomu's and into Hubris or whatever. If you're playing Shadow Assassin, there are builds that are totally reasonable. And again, some of this is you're going to have inflated win rate data because not most popular first item is going to have some inflated win rates. But we think that blue Kane can gain around 1.5 to 1.25% win rate, and that red Kane can gain a very little bit, because up until he transforms, he will use this Q bonus AD ratio for, you know, the first couple of jungle clears, the first couple of ganks and whatnot. And so, you know, he'll gain some win rate because he'll be, you know, ahead 100 gold because he got an assist that he would have gotten otherwise when playing red Kane. If you're playing blue Kane, it just lasts forever. This is partially actually acknowledging that we lowered Kane's melee burst damage by getting rid of the Profane Hydra interaction. So we're giving it back in the melee case. In terms of places to give Kane damage, I chose not R and not W, and not passive, because passive is what we use every single time, and I wanted to give something that was more fun and exciting. Yes, Q is a primary damage tool. This actually requires that Kane expose himself to counterplay and the ability to be attacked. If we put the damage in Kane W, he stands in walls and hits W while moving, and there's no counterplay, and that's really frustrating and really annoying, and probably shouldn't carry a lot of the blue Kane power budget. The R, for better or worse, he can smite to activate this thing. So he just gets it every time, and there's no counterplay. Unless you have Zonias, he's going to get that every time. By putting it in Kane Q, you have the ability to try to outplay Kane, to try to stun him, try to lock him down, pick Malzahar, pick Thresh, pick Poppy, pick whatever, but do a thing that like lets you shut down Kane a little bit. And so this gives Kane power in a place that has room for counterplay. To me, this is the right lever here to give him damage. I think the second best would be passive, because at least that is ambivalent across abilities, and Q is about half of his champion's kit damage. But that to me makes sense of what is correct here for Kane. Lux is probably balanced in support and probably weak, considering that she is a fairly low agency artillery mage in mid. And we are nerfing Zazax, so we know that Lux would actually just be objectively weak in support. She would be sub 50 everywhere, and I don't think Lux needs to be sub 50 even in low elo, where it's the only elo right now that she's in 50% in. So we expect this to somewhat make up for the Zazax nerfs. I don't expect her winner to move a lot in support overall. But I do think Lux is probably on average slightly weak as a mid laner. She just doesn't have ways to force you to die. She honestly is relatively fair. The Q skill shot is relatively slow moving. Like, I think there just is room for counterplay on Lux. And so if Lux has, you know, one of the slightly higher low elo mid lane win rates, I think that is totally acceptable for Lux to have. Maybe I am wrong. If the ban rate says that I am wrong, we will go back. I thought Karma could have 51% win rate mid lane, and I was wrong about that because the play style of instantly resetting your R every single Q cast was clearly not okay with players, and her ban rate went to the moon because they were not accepting a 51% ban rate win rate Karma. And so I was like, oh, okay, she can't be 51. We will nerf her. And if Lux can't be 51, we will nerf her then as well. But that's the nice thing about reacting to how players actually feel about stuff is my theories are my theories, and we can think what we want, but what players actually believe is what we care about. In the way that, like, just this is how the game works, right? This is like the right way to balance things, to care about what players care about. And the theory is that players will be okay with a fairly high win rate Lux, and if we are wrong, we can just nerf her, and that's okay. We move on to Smolder. Smolder, we honestly were over magnitude last patch. We meant to take around 2.5% win rate off. We took about 4% win rate off. So we want to add about 1.5% back. Right now, Smolder is basically bricked as a champion. I don't want to say that's exactly true, but he's like 47, right? So he's like very, very weak, and I don't think he needs to be 47, right? So one thing I want to point out is that champion ban rate is a lagging indicator. The most up-to-date players, which is usually in a high elo, will react very quickly to changes in power, but lower elo players often won't even know a change happened, and it just takes time for them to learn over time. This is just true. If you go to any public data website, like look at Smolder's ban rate by day over the last 14 days, and you'll see it's still going down by day. Like players are still realizing, oh wait, Smolder's not strong anymore, and like there's still like a bunch of banner in this champion, even though he's not actually good. And you would see it keep going down with time. Ultimately, what we would rather do is put the bot lane ecosystem into a relatively balanced state where I guess right now it's kind of crit marksman turn, though we are nerfing Shiv, which is going to nerf Zeri and Jinx pretty meaningfully. We're going to return Smolder back to a reasonably playable state of about 49% win rate, which we think is a totally fine win rate for Smolder to have because of, you know, the obvious strengths on the kit. There's probably the kind of champion where the strengths are so emphasized that he will feel satisfying at 49 in the way that Ezreal is satisfying at 49, in the way that Zed is satisfying at 48. You know, this is like honestly, in some cases, it's a mark of a really well-designed champion where it's like, if he feels fun at 49, you don't have to bribe this guy with observed power, with observed wins, because he feels that good to play anyway. If that's true, that is awesome, right? Like that to me is a champ that we can balance with a high win rate, or sorry, a high play rate at a low win rate. Is like, wow, you made a really sick champ. I'm you know, pretty happy when I get to see one of those things, because we get to buy the like low elo MF win rate with that, because she's so easy to play that like she has to be good somewhere, and it's probably the elo where people don't have a lot of experience in their champions, right? Anyway. Yeah, give 1.5% back to Smolder. If we overshoot, we'll have to nerf him again in 0.8, but that's the goal here. And it's basically acknowledging that I want Smolder to scrap a bit more in the early game. I want him to have a slightly higher incentive to auto-attack you, because he has to play a mid-range combat pattern. And I don't want him to be able to easily build tank items. I know in the like 0.6 or 0.5 rundown, I think it was 0.5 rundown, I mentioned how... or maybe it was 0.4, like, you know, players are building these like high haste fightery builds and players are enjoying them. And so for now, we're willing to accept that. And as time goes on and players got better optimizing and we changed other parts of the kit, such as the late game burn scaling and everything else, we learned more as players learned more. And essentially we're going back on some of that, which is to say, no, actually, we really want Smolder to build squishy. We want Smolder to default to squishy builds here. If you occasionally say it's a game for AP Smolder and go Liandry's, that's fine. But we really want you to go Quick Blades more than you go Shojin. We want you to build RFC and Bloodthirster instead of like Trinity Force or whatever. Obviously, it's like always going ER right now, but it's like we actually want to once again bind you to the squishy crit items and be kind of frail, to be not burst resilient, right? Like, okay, if you bought a shield bow, there is a very clear damage cost because there's no haste and you know, there's no spell multipliers really on shield bow. You are clearly taking a dip in order to get that shield. That's fine. If you're going Bloodthirster, you're getting some lifesteal, but you're not getting any burst durability. Okay, fine. But Shojin kind of gives you the best of both worlds, and so it's like, yeah, if we can coax you to always go Quick Blades, always go RFC, always go BT, this allows Smolder to always be burstable, which has pretty much always been the core like weakness of a like high damage marksman is that you're always burstable. There's actually one of the problems I think in retrospect with trying to buff Overheal is Overheal was competing with Presence of Mind and Triumph. Those were not damage runes. Legend Bloodline I guess existed, and it was, you know, competing with Legend Alacrity, so you had a little bit going on there, but like, you know, if Bloodthirster was good enough to just be like be the best item, then you weren't paying a cost. This is old Bloodthirster with a shield. You know, if Bloodthirster was good enough to be the best item, you weren't paying a damage cost, it was just a good item you just buy it every game, and then all your burst durability, you know, weaknesses went away. So it's why I do like the current version of Shield Bow, because you are paying a real cost. You're only getting AD lifesteal crit. You're getting the shield, but you're clearly losing damage when you do this. Okay. Anyway, so 2 base armor decisions you can scrap early game a little bit better. And the crit ratio on Q, this does not affect burn, does not affect execute. It affects the repeatability of staying in range and landing Q. This incentivizes you to stay in range and cast Q on cooldown. And because you're buying more crit, it actually makes your autos better, which incentivizes you to stay in range and auto attack more. I think those are both good things. And so it's incentivizing Smolder to stay in range, to play squishier, to do all this kind of stuff, because it's not as much, fire and forget one shot. We're moving on to a Fiora nerf. So there is a longer term project I'm going to take on at some point, which is to take a really, really hard look at the laning profiles of every top lane tank and say, which are the ones who are actually supposed to win lane? Let's actually make sure those are the ones who win lane, and take a really, really hard look on who are the first blood winners, who are the, 10-minute gold lead winners, who are the ones who get the plates, who are the ones who get the first turret. Let's really play out the 0 to 1 item laning phase. Who is really winning 0 to 14 minutes of the game, right? And take like a really long pass there and ensuring that the right champions are winning lane, because I'm sure there's some champions whose expectations are not meeting reality. I don't know if it is the most pressing thing, but I think it is valuable. Again, this is not happening at point 8, it's not happening at point 9, it's not happening at point 10, almost certainly. But it's something that I do care about and probably want to do here. Anyway, I think it is important that champions who rely on outplaying you should outplay you in order to win. So Fiora, I think, is too strong right now, especially in elite levels of play. Ultimately, I want to nerf Fiora's early laning phase in the spots that where she just stat checks you. The point here is to preserve the power of vitals and the power of outplays and the power of all the smart stuff, and diminish the value of, I'm just going to stat check you now. And look, 3 AD is a very, very small nudge in this direction, right? But in terms of per win rate, it's, yeah, I'm going to lower your repeated auto attack damage, which by definition makes you care about the other parts of your kit more. This is not, again, this huge sea change, but this is like, hey, here are the considerations in the back of my head. To do a very small one-line reactive balance change, this is a thing that cleanly achieves those goals directionally. Fiora is still going to be a relatively good laner. She's still going to have full power on vitals. She's still going to be highly skilled in skill requirement, but she's losing 3 base AD. Rexi is incredibly too good in top lane. She is a little bit too good in jungle. She is, of course, still elite skewed in jungle. That is expected. That is acknowledged. That will not change. Rexi has, again, top 5 mastery curves in League of Legends. And so that is what it is, right? This is how the champion works. That's okay. And so we acknowledge that anytime we balance her in the jungle, she will have a relatively high win rate in elite and a relatively low win rate in low MMR. And we just have to be willing to accept wherever the inflection point of 50% win rate is. And that inflection point should probably not be 0 OP Masters, and it probably shouldn't be Silver 4. But somewhere is the 50% win rate inflection, and above that MMR, she is a strong jungler, and below MMR, she's a weak jungler. Really, she requires mastery, and she's early game skewed a little bit, and so this is just a champion. So she is a little bit OP in jungle. Again, if you're in Masters, she's one of the best junglers in the game, but like that's 0.5% of the players, right? Whatever. She's a little bit too good. There's a small nerf here. We're nerfing her early game passive regen from 12% to 10% max health. Level 18 is the same, but level 18 is fake, so it's a nerf for the entire game. That's going to take some power off jungle, whatever. Expected, that's going to happen. The primary nerf, though, is top lane Rexi. Top lane Rexi is 53% win rate flat with MOR. She is that good. She is extremely early game skewed by trading her health bar for anything at all and then pressing W and recouping all her health back. Not literally all her health. Again, her regen is like 13% at level 2, but a lot, right? It's actually why I added a minion mod and lowered her base health regen to 2.5, and it still wasn't enough. She's overpowered in top lane by a lot. And so this is going after top lane levers. The other nerf here is your minion fury mod is going from half to 20%. So instead of 12.5 fury per auto, you are getting 5. Yeah, 5 fury per auto. If we have to go to 2.5, we will. Obviously, if she's tunneling at you and taking 5 hits, then leaving, or she's hitting monsters, nothing is changing here. But if she's like, okay, we take a trade, and then I like killed 3 melee minions and I burrowed again, that's getting nerfed by 60% or whatever the math ends up being when you turn 0.5 into 0.2. That is hopefully enough. What's nice is these levers are being used in isolation. We will follow up in 0.8 if needed to make top Rexi a fair champion. I assume we have to target 50% win rate on this champion. I just believe that's true. If not, if Rexi is like 51 in top lane and then she sustains a 1% pick rate and her ban rate goes back down, then we can just AFK and be like, she's 51 in top. She's just kind of good there. Okay, you know, she's a fun tank that like has a bunch of regen. All right. And if people are cool with that, then awesome, right? But my assumption is we need to target 50% win rate on this champion. And then I'll see what ban rate, you know, says about that, right? I'll see what player base, win rate, pick rate, ban rate says about that, and what pro play data says about that. Although, to be fair, we won't have pro play data on 0.7, but like if her ban rate goes down in 0.7, and we think we can chill, and we see MSI, and she's chilling in 0.8, then she can just stay whatever that win rate is, right? So we'll see. But, you know, my theory is we have to target 50, but maybe I'm wrong. So, big changes to Rel. I expect to have to spend time talking about this. I know we're an hour into the video already. We are deleting Rel Jungle from the game. My nose keeps itching. It's really annoying. Sorry about that. So one topic I want to bring up is the idea of having like egregious jungle mods. So Sejuani is a primary jungler. She has aggressive jungle mods. Her passive has no cooldown on jungle monsters. That is an extremely obscene amount of power. She starts E when jungling because she gets to proc it 3 or 4 times on red buff. That is a massive jungle mod. But the thing is, it's implemented in a clever way that's like, that's how the champion works, guys. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Like, Zac W, passive interaction, is functionally a jungle mod. He picks up a W blob that he obviously like won't get stepped on by an enemy champion. Lo and behold, his W's back up, and then he presses it again, and this thing has like a 2-second cooldown, and he kills the camp really fast. Like, that's functionally a jungle mod. Again, it's done very elegantly in a way that like players are not like, wow, you're really forcing this Zac jungle and Sejuani jungle to exist. And there's something to be said for elegance, but I also think design elegance is so incredibly overblown as an important concept. I don't believe that anyone goes like, man, this game is so fun because their systems are more elegant. No, the game is fun because it's fun and the interactions are cool. Like, it doesn't matter how hard-coded random stuff is. Like, one genre I like a lot are bullet heavens, so like Halls of Torment, as an example of a popular one here. And I really like the game. It's really, really fun. And I'll bet you they have to like hand code a bunch of interactions on all of their skill interactions. And technically, it's not design elegance. They're all hand-built. And you know what? Who cares? The game is fun. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but like, I truly believe elegance is like the literal bottom tier importance next to consistency. Like, these actually don't matter. They're like cute to think about and pretend you care, but players don't actually. So like, those are things that I really want to bring up. Is like, hey, that doesn't actually matter. Anyway, let's go to the point about why we're doing this for Rel Jungle. Essentially, Rel is a permanent priority champion in pro play in jungle as a very, very low econ, gank heavy, objective focused, flash focused jungler. Every single one of those things is pro jungle skewed. Pro jungle plays low econ, pro jungle cares way more about objectives, and pro play in general cares more about flash cooldowns because they fight so much less frequently. So Rel will basically never, without a significant kit reshape, have the ability to sustain her ability to jungle without being very clearly pro-jailed. And then, of course, in support, being low econ is the default, and so it doesn't matter that her gold scaling is absolutely atrocious. I mean, her AP ratios are just garbage. Not that we really expect there to be an AP rel out there, but like, you know, she just doesn't scale off gold in any way at all. Again, which is totally fine for support. Okay, sure, that is a thing that exists. So why are we deleting 47% win rate Rel jungle from the game? Well, her player base is tiny. 90% of Rel's players are in support. And so if we're ever in a world where it's like, man, I really would like to buff Rel's support, she could be a bit stronger and be made more fun. It's like, well, have you considered pro jail? Have you considered making pro play even more stale and having even more Rel prio? Because what pro junglers love even more than low econ junglers is flex picks. And this means that, yes, we are literally doing game balance because of pro play. And that hurts every time I have to say it, and hurts you every time it happens. you are absolutely right that this hurts. This is MSI being played on 0.8. This is patch 0.7. We're doing it this patch that we can say if Rel support loses too much win rate this patch, we can buff her to make her good again for the hands of solo queue players without being pro flex pick perma jungle grab. Another thing I want to bring up is I think it is actually good for the watchability of pro play to try to either get rid of or reshape these low econ jungle tanks. I think it's fine if some of them exist. To be clear, I think it's fine if there are some viable, good, low econ junglers. That is totally reasonable to say, I want to have low agency, I want to, support my team and have fun, I'm going to go play Iron, I'm going to go play Sejuani, whatever. I think it's totally reasonable to support and have exist here. But also, I would like the Kindred players to be able to play Kindred, I want to make sure that, you're able to do this. And the nice thing is, our pro meta right now, if you look at actually, the most played champions, it's Wukong, Vi, Lee Sin, it's Xin Zhao, these are champs who have totally respectable solo queue win rates. They often play kind of low econ, and they're good enough to succeed playing low econ and pro play, but they have the right level of gold scaling to where they are not pro jailed. They are popular pro champions whose playstyle is similar to their solo queue playstyle, and their solo queue win rates are fine, and their solo queue builds are greedier, and their pro play builds are less greedy, and they're fine. The spot we got Wukong, Vi, and Xin Zhao and Lee Sin into is awesome. That is where I want more pro junglers to be. But again, without significant kit reshapes, we can't get Rel there, and realistically, Sejuani kind of needs to be there as well. We need to do some stuff to get Sejuani there, because she kind of sucks in solo queue, right? So this all says, hey, there's a bunch of problems here that are very easily solved by deleting Rel jungle, and the actual cost we're paying is relatively few players. And again, if you're a Rel jungle main, and I know these people exist, we have removed the champion from the game that you enjoy. I know that sucks to hear. I know that hurts. And the answer is there just aren't that many of you, which makes this decision easier. If this was we're deleting Lux support from the game, this wouldn't be doable because there are a lot of Lux support players. But 10% of Rel's audience is jungle. I have played with one Rel jungle in solo queue over the 200 and something games I've played this split, and it was a collegiate player practicing for collegiate. They're like a GM Kindred main or whatever, and they're yeah, but we've got collegiate coming up, and so I'm putting my Rel games to practice, and we camped bot for our Draven and won the game. And it's yeah, there's just not a lot of people out here. Her primary, I'm glad, and I want to be clear, I'm glad we tried, right? I'm glad we said yes. Oh no, our design elegance, who cares? We put a bunch of ham-fisted jungle mods in, we made Rel a relatively viable jungler. And she has no audience in solo queue, and her only audience is pro play. This is not worth the continued design cost to support it, because anytime we want to do live balance to Rel support, which is where 90% of our players are and is worth supporting wholeheartedly, we'd be what? But wait, what about that pro tax? What about that flex pick tax? What about, and it's just it makes our jobs harder, and it means that we can serve the 90% of Rel players less well because of that every single time. That is ultimately the reason why this change is happening. And we're doing it now because then we can pivot. If the win rate is bad, we can bring her back because Rel being a viable support for pro is fine. Madrigal's growth is the stat we are giving her back for. We think that this jungle mod deletion is about 0.2% win rate for support. I'm not sure it's actually that low, but we're being a little bit cautious here by just giving her 0.2 MR growth as compensation for some jungle mods. If she sucks, if she loses 1% win rate, we'll just give her 1% of win rate, right, in 0.8 and just bring her back. That's totally fine, right? We're very committed to making Rel support good. Great champion, right? Cool to have her. But anyway, that is the point here. We are nerfing Volibear through a Sundered Sky nerf and an R cooldown. So, yeah, Sundered Sky, the discussion did get spawned by the Reddit thread that got posted earlier today, which is what about just nerfing Volibear Sundered Sky interaction, which is a good idea. And so we did it. And this is, so back in the day, a bunch of designers, and it was based on what the designers wanted to do. Rexi is actually coded this way as well, where a lot of these auto attack replacement spells, if you crit, it crits the base damage of the spell as well. back in the day, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, this could have made sense and was totally reasonable. It's like, hey, look, we're going to go support some alt build where you can go play crit Rexi or crit Volibear or crit Renekton or whatever. And that's not necessarily a problem because alt builds are often fairly cheap to support, and in some cases you really strike gold. AP Volibear has a very, very large player base in top lane, and the champ is totally balanced. And it's like, if it's ever unbalanced, we can tweak some AP ratios, and it takes 12 seconds of effort because he's scripted well. And you can just edit one number in one file, and the AP ratio to attack speed conversion on the passive gets tweaked, and we put his win rate back where it's supposed to be, and the end result is a bunch of players to enjoy AP Volibear top. Great. It's free. And hey, way back when, Sundered Sky didn't exist, which was guaranteed crit your first auto attack. Yeah, it turns out that's a really, really strong interaction when your first auto is your Q. And so it's a ton of burst damage to Jungle Volibear, who Qs at you with, by the way, max rank Q, which has a bunch of AD ratios and a bunch of base damage that you get 70% more damage on. That's a lot of power. And indeed, Volibear's... so what's funny, actually, is I looked at Volibear's jungle win rates over the course of this season. And in the first few patches of the split, people weren't doing the Sundered Sky rush. I think Jungle Volibear was secretly always good, but people weren't building Sundered Sky. I'm pretty sure. I didn't interrogate it rigorously, but I know that Sundered Sky was not popular initially. Nowadays, Sundered Sky is an 80% of all Volibear builds, and of course it should be 100, but it's an 80% of all jungle Volibear builds, and it's an 8% of all top lane Volibear builds, which means this is a very, very free jungle skewed nerf. Volibear top is actually probably slightly weak right now. Volibear jungle is clearly OP right now. And so this is a really, really, really elegant lever that makes a lot of sense. And ultimately, we probably should do a pass on the rest of these skills and probably not have Sundered Sky crit the bonus ability damage on all these champions. Because now that this item does exist, it can do 75% total AD extra damage in the first hit. That is a reasonable amount of extra damage. That's not much more than Trinity Force would give you in most contexts. In fact, it's often less than Triforce would give you in most contexts. And Triforce is way more repeatable. But the fact that it's also going to give you 75% of the 90 base damage, the 100% and the 120% bonus AD ratio is like, oh, that is a lot. That is a lot of extra damage that we don't want to support anymore. It made sense when you had 20% crit chance on your Phantom Dancer, and occasionally you'd get lucky, but it's not okay when literally every Q carries this. So pretty solid change. The expectation, maybe this is wrong, but this is our expectation, is that this does not carry all the win rate loss that we need to give Jungle Volibear. If we're wrong, of course, we can revert some nerfs, but we are tacking on a small R cooldown nerf to go alongside this. Again, top Volibear is already slightly on the weak side. We can do some things like mana cost buffs or something to maybe bring him back. And I don't know, yeah, I mean, be able to, like, press Q and W more often in lane is probably okay. But regardless, top Volibear is probably a little bit weak. Jungle Volibear needs the nerf. Sundered Sky's gonna do the heavy lifting here, but a little bit more. We move on to Camille. I don't think Camille's actually terribly weak right now. She's obviously a pretty good support. We are nerfing Bloodsong this patch, but we think we want to do even more. Because what we want to do is, so I want to be clear. It is fine if Camille support is viable. I think it's fine if she is a viable champion. She should not be the strongest support in the game. But if she's 49x in support, I think that is completely fine. I think that is totally reasonable. And if you want to play sub 50 win rate Camille support because you enjoy it, have fun. Go for it. You're a top laner, you got autofilled support, and you're like, I know this champion. Awesome. Great. Let's go. However, she should not be crowding out other supports, much like I don't want Brand and Zyra to crowd out conventional supports. They can be viable. That's totally fine. But, not crowd out the competition, right? But also, as Camille is a top laner, and her historic player base has always been top lane, we should, we should ensure that Camille's best role is top lane, because that is where her player base has been. And if we get to a point where she's 51 in top lane and 49 in support, and unless there's still severe kit issues with top lane Camille, which might be true, right? But if we're actually her kit is in the right place in top lane, she does the right thing, she, functions in 1v1s, but her player base just is in support, then we will support both roles, right? In the way that Pantheon is a 4-role flex, and there is a real audience in all 4 roles, we are willing to support 4-role Pantheon. That is how the champion works, and that's okay. But the Camille case is, right now, it's well, let's get her to the right spot. So, for example, right now, Karma is back to being a 49% win rate mid laner and a 48% win rate support, and immediately 2/3 of her player base in support. And it's, moving that direction still. So it's like, yeah, okay, people were there because she was OP. That was the only reason, right? So anyway, like being clear about goals here, we are wholeheartedly emphasizing Camille top lane as the primary, as what we care about here. Now we are nerfing Bloodsong. We are also nerfing 20 flat damage off of E, which I believe to be incredibly support skewed. Those are meaningful nerfs that would, I think, bring Camille down, I would argue, below 49% win rate in support. That said, though, Camille top lane, I don't know if she's like actually bad. She's actually like a 51% win rate high elo top laner. So like realistically, this champion isn't like really bad, but I think her laning phase feels bad. I think her like post level 6 laning phase feels bad. In that, like, I think her really early like 1-2-3 scrapping is actually very, very good. But she loses lane on average and is probably meant to be more neutral in lane on average. Right now, she's still an incredibly sharp scaling pick where her late game is good, but her like late laning phase really sucks. And so a lot of what I tried to give her here was mid to late laning phase tools. So I gave her Q rank up on move speed and cooldown. Now, most Camille supports max Q first, but maxing E first is correct. And so this will give her win rate in Camille support, but only the bad Camille supports are doing this. So I guess it brings up her floor. Like, again, this will literally be win rate positive to Camille support, right? But it should be more to Camille top, because Camille top is actually going to use both. So the cooldown going down from 6 seconds to 5 seconds at max rank, and the cooldown starts once you land your first auto. So you land auto 1, cooldown starts. 1.5 seconds later, you press Q again, and then auto, and that takes like half a second. So 2 seconds in, you've landed Q2. So this goes from a 6 minus 2 is 4 second cooldown to a 5 minus 2 is 3 second cooldown. But it's also affected by ability haste. Now, Camille's most common 2-item build has 40 haste on it, and her most common runes have 0 haste on it. So if you, divide, 5 seconds by 1.4, you get to, is it 3? No way you get to 3. You get to like, I don't know, about 4 seconds or something like that. You get like 3 and change, which means 3 and change minus 1.5 or minus 2 is, very short, right? You're now almost going to like trigger Sheen on every single Q press. And that's going to be very, very meaningful. But hey, I'd be willing to wager that top Camille cares about that 1 second cooldown difference way more than support Camille cares about the 1 second cooldown difference. Because top lane Camille is like scrapping a Standard Sky Renekton. It takes you more than 1 Q rotation to kill Standard Sky Renekton. Halo Blade's Camille support has already killed Ashe on Q2 and like doesn't care what the cooldown is. Similarly, the move speed here on the Q matters a lot when you are spacing and playing against these melee champions in a long lane. When you're Halo Blade's Camille support, you're just like, I landed the stun, my Zeri's hitting you now, you're probably just dead. So I think both of these outputs, not only by being skewed toward rank 5 is scaled top lane, but the outputs themselves are skewed towards top lane. Of course, there's, again, will be power and Camille support, and there are 2 nerfs to compensate for that, which is the E damage and the Bloodsong change. There's also a 1-line change to the outer ring damage on W. This is the max health damage going up by 1%. I think this lever is specifically elite skewed, which isn't great because Camille's already elite skewed. But end of the day, she's a kind of hard to play champion, right? She has a bunch of unique outputs. This just being innate to this champion is probably fine. She is one of the more skill intensive top laners, so it's not a problem. It's not a bug. It's a feature that she's elite skewed, right? But regardless, this means that we can, if these buffs are too much, get into a state where Camille is elite jailed, and we have to nerf her because she's too good in elite, in the way that like Rek'Sai jungle can be this before. And we've had champs like this. Nidalee and Zoe are other examples of this, where it's like these champs suck for like 96% of players, but they're really, really good in elite hands, and so they're ceilinged there. I would feel kind of bad if Camille was that. Like if Camille could be at least like 48 in low elo, that's fine. But if she has to go to like 46 in low elo, I'd feel pretty bad. Anyway, these are all just meant to be late laning phase tools, right? Playing the W spacing game is useful. We could have gone for the gold scaling on the W instead of the base value on the W, but I didn't want to give her more scaling buffs. I wanted to give her laning phase agency buffs, even though those buffs are going to be elite skewed. We did a change like this back in 11.24, and it was like 1.2% win rate in low and like 1.8% win rate in elite. It's probably still going to be the case here. It's not this wasn't the entire change. There was an 80 ratio change here as well, but it's probably still going to be an elite skewed change. So yeah, Camille's getting some elite skewed top lane buffs, but I also am concerned that this is too much. But the primary thing was say, hey, what we're going to do this patch is like try to make top lane Camille players feel seen, feel heard, and feel like their champion is good. And then I believe we'll have to nerf this champion, and we'll just do that in a patch 2 when that's required of us. The final change is we're updating the recommended items on Nunu. Nunu consistently has a very, very low win rate. A large portion of that is people are really, really griefing their builds. Now, AP Nunu is not trash. It's not great, but whatever. Tank Nunu with Sunfire is very good. AP Nunu is fine if you go Leandries. I've run into 2 or 3 AP Nunus in solo queue, and they've all gone Leandries and been successful. The most common Nunu builds for generic players, though, is Storm Surge or Rocket Belt, and those items are trash on this champion. He is really, really good at using Leandries. You should be building that, and so we're doing a rec items update to basically remove Storm Surge and Rocket Belt. My understanding is dropping those 2 from the rec items page to get people to build him more correctly. The Leandries, like, per item win rate will go down because the bad Nunus will start building the more correct item. But then we'll get a better look at what his run rate actually is when people aren't troll building, and we'll get a better look. And then if we have the buff, and then we will, but at least they're building correctly on the way to doing that. So that is the patch. It's a long rundown, 80 minutes long, but there's a lot to cover. There are a lot of, like, theory points to talk about. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.